Well, forgive me. I guess I should ask you to stand again because this is the gospel reading.
How obedient we are.
Our gospel comes from the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 5, beginning at verse 1. Listen for God's word to you this day. When Jesus saw the crowds, he went up the mountain, and after he sat down, his disciples came to him. Then he began to speak and taught them, saying these words: Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they will receive mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when people revile you and persecute you and utter all kinds of evil against you falsely on my account. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward is great in heaven. This is the gospel of the risen Christ. Thanks be to God.
Thank you for joining in and sharing in this. In our gospel today, Jesus is with a crowd on a mountainside, and as he is there with them, he is teaching. And he has these statements that he makes that in a sense are a call on people's lives. Blessed or happy are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Happy are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Happy are the meek. Happy are those who hunger. Happy are the merciful. Happy are the peacemakers. Happy are the pure in heart. And happy are those who are persecuted for my sake. It sounds odd, doesn't it? But they are, in a sense, a calling. Happy are those who have found their call, their ministry, their meaning in life. Have you felt that you don't really belong where you are? Have you felt that you are not in the job that you really would like to be in? Have you felt that you're not even in the body that you think you should be in? Have you ever felt that what you are doing is not fulfilling in a sense of you being in the right place? It's sometimes like you haven't discovered the purpose that you have, or you haven't discovered what it is that will make you and God happy. And in a sense, of course, that's how Maria feels in the musical, The Sound of Music. She was a young woman who loved to sing, who loved to be out in the hills, but she was living in a convent. She was beginning the process of becoming an ordained nun. She felt restless. She felt unhappy until the day when she was sent as a governess to a widowed captain and his 7 children. And there she found her true calling, to bring joy and to music to the family and to fall in love with the captain. You see, Maria's story is a beautiful example of how God uses our passions and talents to serve him and to serve others. She didn't know what God had planned for her, but she trusted God. She trusted and followed his guidance. And she was willing to leave behind her comfort zone and embrace a new challenge. She was faithful. She was courageous. And she even faced danger and persecution from the Nazis. She was a blessing to the people around her, and she was blessed in return. What we can see in Mariah's story and how we might apply that to our own lives is what I want to share in the next few minutes. You see, I believe that God has a special plan for everyone. Everyone who is gathered here, everyone who is joining us online or watching this on demand, God has a purpose for you. Just like he had for Maria. And what's more, God has given us gifts and abilities that we can use to glorify God and help others. He may be calling us to do something that we hadn't expected that we would do, or perhaps didn't even understand at the time was our call. But God will always be with us as our guide, as our strength, as our comforter. God may ask us to leave behind something that we love and that we value, but he will always provide for us, and he will always reward us. So will you pray with me? God of the hills and song, teach us the courage to follow our hearts and pursue our passions even in the face of uncertainty. Help us to find beauty in every moment and to spread joy and love in the world. Grant us the strength to stand up for what is right, to protect our loved ones, and to always have faith in your plan. Amen. I go to the hills when my heart is lonely. I know I will hear what I have heard before. My heart will be blessed with the sound of music, and I'll sing once more. Wonderful words by Oscar Hammerstein. But they sound similar too, don't they, to some of the words in the Psalms. I lift my eyes to the hills. From whence comes my help? My help comes from the Lord who made the earth and heaven. Both the lyrics of the song and the psalm have that same sort of timbre, don't they? They have that same tone. Both of them talk about being empowered, renewed, experiencing something special, supernatural, by being in a special place, namely the hills. Now, here at Roberts Park, I have talked, I know, in the past of those thin places. Remember, I spoke about how Celtic spirituality in particular talks about places that where almost heaven and earth touch. There is just a thin veil between them. Places that we can go to where that boundary which seems invisible nevertheless encourages us. Places where there is a deep sense of God, God's presence and God's power. Where we can find the spiritual and the natural intersecting in some really meaningful way. The thin place for Maria was clearly in the mountains, the hills, and the music. And she took to her thin place. And music helped her experience the sacred and the holy. Where are your thin places? What are your thin places? I hope you've been thinking about that. I hope, in a sense, you have a thin place or thin places. especially in this world that can seem so chaotic and challenging, a world that is in conflict, a world that is at war, a world where oneself often appears to be the first of all things and be damned with the rest. A world perhaps that has lost its way when it comes to God. You see, we need those thin places. We need to get in touch with the great Spirit that resides within us and beyond us. And so, like Mary and Jesus, remember, it was Jesus who would go up into the hills, who would go off to pray, who would go into a boat, who would withdraw to find spaces where he could be close to his Father. Sometimes it was a beach. Sometimes it was just simply to be away from the crowd. But like Maria and like Jesus, I want to encourage you to find and use those thin places. I want to encourage you to find yourself close to God where you can hear, in a sense, God's voice speaking. Because we all need to get in touch with that great Spirit that resides within us. Because when we do that, we find a sense of peace, a peace that passes our understanding. And when you find that, it will help you to sing through the night like a lark that is learning to pray. I think those are some of the best words that are ever written in a musical. Oh yeah, there are thousands and thousands and thousands of words written, I know, but for me, these speak volumes. To sing through the night like a lark that is learning to pray. I could preach a dozen sermons on just that phrase. Don't worry, I won't. But those places that help you find and feel close to God are the places where you can sing through the night like a lark that is learning to pray. You know, there are so many great messages in this musical, but I want to just focus on one of them. You will see on the back of your bulletin, if you haven't already, there's a synopsis of the story of The Sound of Music. So I'm not going to tell you the story, it's there for you to look at. But I think that one of the most prominent messages that is in this musical revolves around Maria and her vocation. You know, it's funny that I went from being a professional lighting and sound engineer working in theater and broadcast television to becoming an ordained minister. Maria went the opposite. Maria, at the beginning of the story, is training to be an ordained nun. But that vocation wasn't the right fit. And in the end, she finds her fit in a family that needed someone who could love the children and indeed could love the captain. And thank God she did. Because all our lives are richer for it. Maria leaves the convent and becomes involved with the lives of these young children, and the rest, as they say, is history. I want to share with you a story that begins back in the 1990s of a young man called Dan, who was attending a church in Georgia. Dan was a very talented, incredible tenor voice, a big fellow with an incredible voice and very smart, super intelligent. But he also had a great passion for ministry, for service, and especially for children. Dan thought his calling was in the church. And indeed, the minister of his church thought his calling was in the church and wanted to find a way to bring Dan into the ministry of the church. But circumstances were such that the church couldn't afford him, and Dan had other ideas anyway. And so Dan left the church to move north in Georgia to a new job in a camp ministry. In 2016, Hurricane Matthew hit down the Florida coast and into Georgia. The minister of the church that Dan had been attending remembers that time because the church and the staff and everyone else was under a mandatory evacuation order. But the minister and his wife felt they couldn't leave the area because his in-laws, his wife's parents, were both confined to wheelchairs, and they had 4 large dogs, and he didn't want to impose that on anyone. Yes, of course, people who were outside of the area offered opportunities for shelter and things, and he felt that he couldn't impose on them, so they decided that they would hunker down and they would ride out the hurricane. They had shared on social media that they thanked people for the offers, but that the circumstances were such that they had to stay there. That was until they received a text message and then a call from Dan. They hadn't spoken to Dan for all these years, 10 plus years. And Dan said, "I have the perfect place for you. It's just been built. It's a new cabin. It has 4 bedrooms and the beds have never been slept in. It's that new, and it's all on one level, and it's designed for wheelchairs, and you can come because you can bring the dogs because the woods around us will be great for the dogs to go to." And the minister says that he thanked Dan, but felt that he'd already made the decision that he was hunkering down until his wife learned of it. And she thought, "I think this is a wow moment. I think this is a God-given moment, and you need to listen." Well, if he didn't listen to her, he listened to God. Because in the end, they got in their 2 big vans, she with her parents in the wheelchairs, he with his dogs in the back, well, 3 of the dogs and 1 in the other one, and they drove up to this camp. There they were met with Dan. There, they wrote out the storm. It's interesting that Dan's surname is Matthews. And it was Hurricane Matthew that moved them north. But writing about that experience, the minister says this: "The place we came to was called Camp Twin Lakes. It is huge. It's in Rutledge, Georgia, near Madison. It's for young people with disabilities or illnesses or other medical issues. A camp that has a medical lodge where children can receive chemotherapy and dialysis and lab tests. It has 30 large cabins to stay in, a 400-seat dining hall, a gymnasium, an amphitheater. They have archery and tennis and miniature golf, all with wheelchair access. This camp offers canoeing, kayaking, horseback riding, a ropes course, nature trails, and the coolest treehouse I have ever seen. It has a farm with animals and vegetables and a teaching kitchen where campers learn about preparing fresh, healthy meals. It's amazing." He says that the favorite story that Dan likes to tell is about a girl who was confined to her wheelchair. And at the camp, they have the ability to hoist people out of their wheelchairs and put them on a zip line. When the girl got down from the zip line experience, she was in tears, not tears of fear, but tears of joy. And she said, I might not be able to walk, but I can fly. And the pastor of the church said, and here was I trying to find a way of bringing Dan into the church. God had put him where he needed to be. He was doing great things. Things with people whom society found it difficult to work with. Things with whom society had often rejected as not being able to participate in these things, who by their nature were different. In the end, the minister said, he was doing good things, what God has done with him. You know, I think, in a sense, for that minister, it's a bit like a male version of the Maria von Trapp. Here is Dan Matthews not going into ordained ministry, but touching the lives of countless children and youth and their parents with so many powerful experiences and so many wonderful ways. You see, you don't have to be a minister to do God's work. In fact, we are all called to be ministers. This is our vocation, that we seek to follow the ways of Christ. And in fact, you probably have greater ways of reaching people than I do. You can do greater things in the lives of people than sometimes even I can do. You know, it was a privilege yesterday to be at the Celebration of Life service for Michelle Stoneburner. Many of you will know Michelle. Some of you were present, I know, yesterday. And as a long-term professor at the University of Indianapolis, she met thousands of students, faculty, and staff. Indeed, we heard a tribute from the vice president, who estimated that in Michelle's time there, she probably met and engaged with 18,500 students and staff and faculty. And those of you who knew Michelle, like we know Michelle, would know that every single one of those people were important to her and that she would find a way of reaching out. And indeed, we heard some stories of how she, out of her own means, helped so many students to graduate, not just with her time, but with her talents and her treasures and so many different ways. She allowed people to achieve their goals, to find their place in the world. So whatever you do to make a living, it's also important that you be known for the way that you live out the gospel. And how do we do that? We love. It's as simple as that. That's what it's all about. And as hard as it gets, we love because love always wins. And I probably shouldn't say that because it's not what love is about. Love, in a sense, completes us. It is the Alpha and the Omega. It is where we came from and to where we are going. It is the source of everything that we have. God's love. If you allow love and compassion to work in your lives, you will always be ready to sing through the night like a lark that is learning to pray. I want to read to you the words that you sang just a short while ago. Joyful joyful, we adore thee, God of glory, Lord of love. Hearts unfold like flowers before thee, opening to the sun above. Melt the clouds of sin and sadness, drive the dark of doubt away. Giver of immortal gladness, fill us with the light of day. Mortals, join the mighty chorus, which the morning stars began, binding all. Love divine is raining on us, binding all within its span. Ever singing, marching onward, victors in the midst of strife, victors in the midst of strife. Joyful music leads us sunward in the triumph song of life. Amazing words. And then I want to draw the attention to the last stanza of a hymn you have yet to sing, but will sing later. Lord, your summons echoes true when you but call my name. Let me turn and follow you and never be the same. In your company I'll go, where your love and footsteps show. Thus I'll move and live and grow in you, and you in me. Callings can be confusing. In my own story, which I know I've shared in past before you, I never wanted to go into full-time ministry. I never wanted to become an ordained minister. I didn't want to do what my dad and my uncle did. So I negotiated with God. I said, this far but no further. Okay. I hear you. I will become a local preacher, licensed pastor. And that's all I need. Thank you very much. But God continues to work on your heart. God continues to draw you into the life that He is calling you to. And we're all good sometimes at negotiating with God, trying to find a way of saying, this far but no further, thank you very much. I have what I need. I don't need anything else. And as I've shared before, it was the death of a close friend who worked with me in a children's ministry, I guess, in Boys Brigade, who called me one day and said, Andrew, I'm going to die. I know I'm going to die. And I want you to help prepare me and the family for that event. I had absolutely no idea what I was going to do. No idea whatsoever. Nobody had ever put that sort of thing before me. So what did I do? I picked the phone up to my dad. Dad, I know you're a full-time minister. What would you do? Do you know what my dad said? My dad's words were, love them. Just love them. Be there. Listen. And when you're asked a question you don't know, simply say, I haven't a clue. I don't want to give you platitudes. I don't want to give you words that are sense meaningless. Just say, I don't know. But I'll cry with you. I'll laugh with you. I'll be there and I'll love you. And in the end, well, I guess I caved in. And God called me to where I am now. And would I, in all of the training that I had in that wonderful university in Durham, would I ever have thought that I would be leading a church in the center of Indianapolis in America? Not in a million years would I have thought that that was where God was calling me. And yet, in 2 weeks' time, I will celebrate the 10th anniversary of starting work here at Roberts Park. Why? Because in the end, God's call works for good in everything. And what we sometimes think is God's call isn't God's call. That's why we have mechanisms within the church to help us decide what it is that God is calling us to. That is why we have people around us whom we trust to say, I think there is something in this. Or to say, Andrew, no, you don't want to be doing that. No, if they ask you to become a superintendent, no, you don't want to be doing that. Not that that'll ever happen. Maria set out with a vision that somehow she was called to serve God in ordained ministry in the convent. But that wise Mother Abbess saw that she had something else. And when Maria comes back, having been to the house, and sits down with her and says, look, I don't know whether I should be here in the convent or whether I should be with the family. The Mother Abbess tells her, well, she doesn't tell, she sings, because it's a musical. It's a bit like opera. You get stabbed, and instead of bleeding, you sing. In a musical, it's the same thing. You have a conversation, and suddenly, halfway through the conversation, somebody stands up and sings. Well, the Mother Abbess sang, climb every mountain, ford every stream, follow every byway, until you find your dream. That's what God's call is. The dream that you find. I'm going to invite the choir to lead us in some of the music of the sound of music. And I want to take this time for you to just let the music speak to you about your life, where you are, what you are doing, and what that means for you. Because every single one, everyone here in this place, everyone watching this has a dream that can be fulfilled if we but listen to God's call. Heavenly Father, as we leave this place, may our hearts indeed be lifted to the hills. May we know where our strength comes from. May we be encouraged, as Maria and those in the Von Trapp family were, to share the gifts they had with those around them. May we find our vocation, our calling. And may we know that you are with us through all of the trials and tribulations and joys of life. And so may the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious to you. May the Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace this day and forevermore. Amen.